Hi, good morning. My name is Hayley Hughes, and I am coming to you today from Austin, Texas. So thank you, everyone, for having me and Blend Web Mix here in Lyon. This is my first time, and I'm really excited to be here. Today, I'm going to be talking about building culture, collaboration, and trust through design. So without further ado, we're going to get started. A little bit about me. Over the past decade, I have worked at a global tech company where I was one of 2,000 designers at IBM. And over the past year and a half, I worked at Airbnb, where I was one of a couple hundred designers in San Francisco. Now I am currently a UX manager at Shopify, and that's an e-commerce platform working remotely, and they're based in Canada. And through all of these different experiences, as one of 200 or 2,000 designers, what I've learned is that design systems are really integral to the way that organizations are working and operating today, and that we actually have to start changing the ways that we work in order to be more inclusive and design unified experiences for the people that we're serving. So design language systems are a set of decisions, actually, about the ways that people create and interact with things in the world. They're made up of things like guidelines and communities, tools, design, and code that guide how people experience what we make over time. So this is an example of Airbnb's product redesign. Years ago, about a couple years back, that they intentionally crafted in order to yield their design language system. And once the direction was set, what they did was look at individual screens and start to break out components, common solutions to user problems. They simply named those things, and they set them up to be very large and modular. Each component has its own functionality so that when you need to do a certain job, you can use it across different platforms and contexts. Now, if you see that there isn't a component that you need, you can use things like these primitives, these colors and typography and spacing, in order to create a new component so that you can build a new piece of functionality into the product. How it works and how it looks was very specifically designed because at the time Airbnb was trying to solve for the consistency problem, so that the entire experience of using the app felt very cohesive. So part of the solution was actually making sure that the components were abstracted so that they could be mirrored in code. And engineers essentially had the same naming in code as the design or the file specs, no matter what platform they were designing for. The design system at Airbnb was device agnostic, and you define it once so that it's built in many different form factors. When the language was the same, an engineer could build a design without even looking at it, just by referencing its name and code. And this is part of the power of technology and the design language system, because it builds a relationship between the designers and the engineers, which ultimately impacts the products they make and the people that they serve. Like at Airbnb, systems often start as this really small kind of grassroots movement by designers and developers, usually in one pocket of an organization. And over time, the demand starts to spread like wildfire. As more teams start to use the system, the decisions that were initially made for maybe one use case need to become more flexible and enable creativity without sacrificing the consistency of a shared language. What I found is that people want to evolve these design language systems together, and they're more likely to use it when you design an inclusive culture that teams feel that they belong to and that they can participate in. So today I'm going to be sharing with you some anti-patterns and good patterns about how my team either built or broke trust with our users and what we learned from different trial and error. So I'll start with an example of what not to do. When you're trying to design a system, the system doesn't work for everyone in every use case, at least not on your first go. But there are some ways and some people you should always be designing for. And I'll tell you up front that my team at IBM had to learn this one the hard way. So over the past 5 years, IBM hired a lot of designers, at least 2,000, to work in 44 global studios. Hundreds of them were straight out of college, and this was their first job. And they needed a shared language that was free of prescription and coded solutions, something that promoted creativity and inspiration and helped beginners make better decisions. So our first release came without any code or any components. Instead, it was more of a vision for unity, not uniformity, across IBM. And that all started back in 2014. Our head of design sponsored a design language, and almost in a matter of weeks, we started sending out blog posts with different draft versions of new icons or color palettes or typography for community feedback. Seemed pretty inclusive, right? We were letting people put their red pens all over our ideas. I even went on road shows to teams all over IBM to share the values and principles of the design language, give them a chance to ask questions and learn more. At the same time, the team was testing and workshopping ideas and used design thinking to bring diverse perspectives into the process. In this example, we actually sent out posters of icons without labels, and we asked people in our global offices in maybe Mexico City or Dubai or Bangalore to write what they thought each symbol meant underneath. We learned, for example, that our overview icon, which is just a single eyeball, could be perceived in certain cultures in the Middle East as evil or antagonizing. So it was really important to do this kind of research and understand what these metaphors meant. We kind of assumed, as we were working through this, that we were checking all the right boxes. We'd ask for feedback, we were doing all of these workshops and testing across cultures. So our design leadership was extremely supportive of this collaboration, and so much so that we eventually got enough investment to start building out a team. So in a matter of months, we charged ahead to start making this website. It was intended to feel like a maker space where you could go in and experiment and tinker, and we were designing for different types of use cases. So we were thinking about a learner, a crunch time creator who's trying to get something released, and an inspired one, maybe someone who's just coming to understand how all the pieces fit together. In less than 1 year, we had gone from this outdated pattern library where engineers could build and ship software without really ever talking to a designer, to our amazing online makerspace of a design language full of color and inclusive decision-making. But we'd been moving about 100 miles an hour, like a startup, inside of a really old enterprise company, so fast that we had no idea what was about to happen next. Our design language launch date was in October. We were supposed to go public with this new language. And our head of design was about to get on stage in New York City at a design and business conference to announce the public availability of the site. But the morning of his big talk, he got a call from our chief accessibility officer at IBM, who gave him a thumbs down with going live with the site. She said that there were serious flaws in the way that the site had been architected. The code had been written, the way the code was written and some of the design solutions were solved for would essentially prevent many people with certain kinds of disabilities from even accessing our site. This was obviously not good for, first of all, our users, and second of all, it was a big risk for a company who states that it's always designing with accessibility in mind and following WCAG guidelines. The launch was delayed for months. it wasn't until December that it eventually got released. And at that point, most people were focused on their holiday break. So as you can imagine, our team was pretty let down. We hadn't really been working with our accessibility specialists or bringing in people with disabilities onto our team to work together, and we needed to engage them. We knew about things like color contrast, but there was a lot that we didn't know about accessibility, and we had also left people out of our site. As we fixed things and we began learning from our mistakes, we decided to bounce back, not just with a new site, but also with a new mindset to share. So we created an open source handbook. If you Google it, you can Google IBM's Accessibility Handbook, and it should come up as a website and a downloadable PDF. And this was for all teams, inside or outside of IBM, to learn best practices in accessibility, and it was for product managers, designers, and engineers, because we all have a role and responsibility to play. It turned out that the handbook was actually downloaded more than 50,000 times at IBM, and we got more traffic to the accessibility site than we did to our design language, so a lot to be learned from that. For a design language to last, what we learned is that people need inclusive mindsets and tools that are integrated into their workflow that encourage positive behaviors. I know that for our team, the wake-up call from our Chief Accessibility Officer changed our way of working. And since then, IBM has continued to make learning and education really central to making a sustainable system and a resilient designer population that knows how to bounce back from adversity. The design language that I shared with you was actually deprecated eventually at IBM. We actually started over, not only to make sure that accessibility was a priority from the start, but to bring our marketing team and our digital team and our content teams into our process to evolve the design language too. We were willing to essentially give up everything that we had made and to start from scratch, giving everyone a voice and a seat at the table to invent something new together. So today, there's a new design language system at IBM. Also open source. It's not just for software product teams. It now serves editorial, event, environments, and hardware teams. And it essentially extends across anything that's designed at IBM, from a business card to an actual mainframe server. What we discovered is that in order to build trust with teams and to learn from our mistakes, we had to give up the things that we designed. But what we also learned is that we should never let go of the lessons that we learned through the process. For all the type nerds in the room, a quick note: the design language also came with a new open source typeface called IBM Plex, which can be used by students, freelancers, your mom, and it's available in all different kinds of global languages, so it's worth checking out. The second pattern I want to share with you today is a good pattern for building trust with teams that I stumbled upon when my team broke trust with me as a new hire. Building trust is not about setting up a design system and then just forgetting about it. It's a foundation that is then built on top of. So this means that you have to set up things like infrastructure and operations. Not so much designerly words, but things that enable design and code to be understood, challenged, reused, and contributed by anyone, from newcomers to seasoned leaders in your organization. So when I started at Airbnb, their system that I shared in the beginning was already in existence, and the goal was to make it faster and easier to make consistent, effective, and beautiful products, which sounds great. The team who first created the language redesigned the products, and out of that, they created the system. But trying to actually build both at the same time came with a lot of unexpected challenges. It was a template, a code library, and some tools, and as a new hire, you would get a 1-hour onboarding experience, and then you were sent on your way to your team. If you get stuck, there's essentially a weekly office hours for Q&A, And that was kind of the extent of the support experience for the design system over the 2 years before I arrived. The core team who designed and built the system knew the guidelines like the back of their hands, but they never bothered to write them down. And as more teams tried to use it, people started to ask questions. Like me. As a new hire to the team, I asked, so when should I use gradients? And someone would say, they're for special moments. To this day, I'm still not sure what qualifies as a special moment. And making me guess did not help me work faster or easier. So out of my own struggle came a reframe of our team's mission, not focused on the product, but on the people. How could we operate as stewards who could build trust with the community who's trying to use our system? So my first instinct was to try and visualize relationships. I pulled apart an old spreadsheet of the org chart and started talking to people who try to use our systems, people who advocated for it, people who were detractors and didn't ever want to use it. And I spent 2 months on the job doing really nothing other than listening to these teams. Many teams who use our design system aren't necessarily even creating user interfaces. Data scientists, legal teams, finance teams, and our human resources team all apply the principles and templates even to their presentations and event materials, so we found a way for them to participate too. I asked people to write love letters or breakup letters to the design language as if it was a person that they might be dating, and made a video to play for our design leadership. It went something like this.
DLS, I love you because you make my life so easy. But sometimes adding new components or modifying an existing one is so hard.
DLS, it's complicated. I love you so. However, I need you to be more open. In the past, you communicated so well, but now I can never find your single source of truth.
Dear DLS, I do love you, but I need a break because there isn't a clear way to collaborate on changes or propose and then implement updates.
Hey DLS, I've had a great relationship with you so far. I love that you strive to create consistency and make me more productive. You provide templates and documentation and tools. You also have partners embedded across various teams. These are all great, but it is hard to use all of the offerings, and the process of contributing to DLS is still very opaque.
Getting this kind of engagement early aligned our whole team around a vision. On the left here is our design director, who actually for the first time just leapt out of his chair after watching that video and started coming up with ideas for how we could improve the designer's journey. And it was the first time on our team that everybody had been using design thinking to drive the next act of the system. So in Act 1, the design language system was thought of as a product, as an offering. But in Act 2, my mission was to drive operations, which involved collaboration across disciplines and across the company. The support of these operations included things like a contribution process, shared ownership models, and enabling understanding so that people knew how to use our offering and give back. And essentially what I also discovered through building out this kind of second act of the system is that the two of these things actually depend on each other in order to be successful. So while researching, I created a few models to help people understand their relationship to the system and to our team. The first one was the cyclical model of adoption. At Airbnb, teams have a choice to use the system or not, and you have to make it easier to use in order for them to want to use it. So going clockwise, the right side is all the things that teams do before they ever even use your system. They have to discover that it exists. They have to assess whether or not it's worth their time or whether they'd rather invest the energy in building things from scratch. And they either accept it or they reject it. On the left side are the steps of integrating the system into their existing product workflows. So this could be gathering all kinds of resources and components from different teams, including the design system team. Then they look at all of those and they modify or tweak or adapt those different pieces and parts to their unique user context. And if you've designed it well, they have an opportunity to evolve the system with you and contribute back. So once we had a way to help people wrap their minds around how to adopt the system, we also needed to understand the health of the system itself. So we started by building a maturity model of the design language system. Using that research, we could map people's understanding, their perception of the system, their commitment level to actually using it, and certain kind of behavioral habits you can watch when you see designers and developers actually working together, and a process. You could kind of see what were the different processes that they used in order to integrate that into their workflow. So, for example, the kind of way we looked at this is either the design language system would be outdated, progressive, or modern. And I could assign points, 1 point for outdated, 2 for progressive, 3 for modern, in order to kind of come up with an overall score for how we were doing with the design language system. For example, if teams had told us, we'll get around to using the design language system, but we're in the middle of a big release and we have a launch deadline, that commitment was kind of seen as low, and it showed us that the team thought about their work as being innovative and cutting edge, and the design system as being somewhat outdated and slow. Another example would be if a team had JIRA tickets or like work assigned accessibility bugs, styling enhancements in their product sprints or on their roadmaps, it showed that they had made a more progressive commitment to using the design language system. And if they had actively started writing documentation or giving work back, like a new data visualization palette they created, that was a commitment of time and resources to making our system more modern. Lastly, we started diagramming an architecture to help people understand what's actually in this system. What do all these really complex domain words mean? And how could the DLS span across different offerings and platforms that we served? So once people had an actual mental model to understand the design language system, we started to have a new opportunity to create processes and frameworks that help people share ownership in how the system would evolve and give them recognition for participating. The first thing that we designed was actually a program in order to hack the system. So in the 2 years prior, designers really didn't have a feedback loop where they could share local systems knowledge that they were learning across teams. And what we did was essentially had people come together bi-weekly, and there'd be this open forum where they could bring up different topics. In the first session, they came up with a lot of ideas for things that they wanted to solve. One of them was a better and more robust pattern library. The other one was building out themability so that they could modify and change colors to express different sub-brands within the organization. And from those open forums would come action items. It wasn't about our design language system team just taking inputs and then doing the work. We were actually helping project manage and empowering the people who came with the ideas to self-solve them. So this would include actually giving them time in these meetings, in these larger sessions, to get the work done, and then to share back out and to recognize people and celebrate the work and reflect on it. So these people that were part of this program were nominated by their managers. It was one from each line of business, and the designers essentially would raise their hand to work on improving the system. And it was not about constraints at that point. For us, it was about innovation and how people could think differently. One designer in our program we surveyed said that showing up to what we called the UXP, User Experience Partners Program, has been the best thing about the design language system since it was created. And you can read more about the program if you want to dive deeper on Airbnb's blog. We kind of detailed out all of the little pieces and parts at titled Systems Thinking Unlocked, so worth checking out. We also used momentum from that program to pilot a team contribution model. And this is where people could share their work back into the system. Historically, the team's work had been just really impossible to find and use. And therefore, teams wasted a lot of time redesigning and coding already solved problems. And I'll give you an example of that. I remember watching a designer, and when I was just observing her working, what she would do in order to kind of build a new product flow, she would go to the actual Airbnb platform, and she would screenshot different parts of the UI, and then she would go back into Figma or Sketch and build those things from scratch. Obviously, that couldn't be more inefficient. What was more important to me is that it also meant that teams never saw their product work reflected back into the system. They were essentially being asked to use something that they weren't a part of and that they didn't belong to. So we created a contribution model that all teams could give back to with just a simple goal of making things visible. It didn't matter for us at this point in time that the component was a certain level of quality. What we cared about is that you could actually just find it. And as part of this process, designers would volunteer an hour a week to review components for other designers. It wasn't just the design language team basically coming and you sharing your work and us telling you this isn't good enough. It was actually just a decision about marking what was baked into the component for free if you decided to reuse it. And what this meant is maybe half of these things on the checklist were checked when you went and saw the component, and it would encourage you to continue to up-level it, make pull requests in GitHub, and keep improving the component even if it wasn't yours from the beginning. So on the engineering side, we also had a complementary tool that made all of these components easy to search and reference, with standard naming and screenshots from the product itself and supporting documentation all in one place. So this was really the vehicle that made it possible to make the contribution model work. And in over a period of 2 months, there were over a dozen contributions from different lines of business and different designers and developers. Teams told us that they would contribute again because it was the fastest and easiest way that they knew in order to make their components available across the company. So that was pretty exciting to watch folks actually see their work in the system. But we had some questions. Some people would ask things like, okay, what happens when I've contributed all of this work back to this larger effort, but my product team doesn't directly benefit? So we had to make sure that people had time to document and to give back. And so we made this shared ownership of the design language system a part of the experience design career framework at Airbnb. And I spent about 8 months on this project working with other designers and contractors outside of IBM in order for us to kind of re-engineer how teams were incentivized and the performance review process. So in particular, as a part of organizational development, which was a new area of the career framework, teams and individuals were rewarded for participating in systems work, not just product work. And a year later, what I can safely say to you is that your design system is only as strong as the relationships that you have with the people who use the system. So now I'd like to switch gears with you and share what I'm working on at Shopify. I'm only a couple months in, so there's not a whole lot yet, but I'm already starting to find opportunities for collaboration. The Polaris design language system is open source for Shopify teams. That's something you can also check out online. It's for third-party developers and anyone really wanting to learn about systems. Right now, we're working on extending the guide to help teams who, for example, design screens that need to work for a variety of non-traditional lighting conditions in things like different warehouse environments, or teams who are designing for merchants in stores where their devices are stationary and that they're stretching their arms 100 times a day to reach for very small touch targets. So there are a lot of local contexts and unique use cases that we now have to expand the design language system to serve. My job is a little bit different than it was before because I'm now working remotely with other teams around the world. And co-creating remotely is challenging, for sure, but not impossible. So this is an example of a highly functional, not so glamorous, journey map template I built a few weeks back, which I'm giving teams to reimagine how they would want to work with our team in the future and how to evolve these subsystems, these systems of systems that they have built within the organization in order to accommodate for all of these unique use cases. So at Shopify, I've started mapping journeys with 2 different teams. One who hasn't built a system yet but wants to, and another one who's already built one but wasn't really able to use much of Polaris in order to do it. Capturing their inspirational visions for the future can be done remotely, run in sessions like this one, where you record while people are sharing back the steps that they took in order to build the system, different needs that they have, different interaction touch points, maybe, pairing sessions or different templates or other things you've created and so on. And so this is just saying that we're collaborating in one environment together in real time while I'm interviewing the team remotely. So this is a little bit of the feedback so far from these sessions. One designer said, "I feel good. I feel like this is therapy." Designer as therapist is a new role that I'm currently embracing. Never been before, but I highly recommend it. And then the other one said, "I love it because I'm reflecting with you on the work that I did for a year and a half," which is something that we never did. And that one was kind of a surprise to me, was that the designers really haven't had the time to, stop and pause and slow down and think about what they learned in order to evolve and move forward. So I facilitate dozens of these different types of activities to include people in my process. Some of these can be done in real time. Others can help you when you're working in different time zones. Some help you generate ideas for inspiration, and others help you evaluate and measure success. So it's just along a spectrum. I kind of mapped them out a little bit so that you have ideas in case you're in these parts of your process. And all of this is to say that there's no need to work in a silo ever by yourself. Even if you don't work with other designers, you're not alone. My recommendation is to get interested in as many things as possible outside of design. Find a data scientist, a doctor, a developer, a dancer, even your dad to work with, and come up with your own collaboration activities together. I've just been talking about a lot of different ways that you can foster collaboration to include people in your process of creating and evolving a design system in my case. But I just want to close by diving a little deeper into some examples of how to create an inclusive culture. So culture is the sum total of our collective behaviors over time. It's how you behave, and it's also how you motivate others to behave. Trust building requires this kind of deep listening process to your internal teams, and just as important, their end users, who all have very different backgrounds and ability levels. So recently, one of my former colleagues said that in his research, this is with hosts and guests at Airbnb, he talked to a person with blindness who said something that I will never forget. They said, "I don't want to browse the internet and have a separate experience in accessibility mode. I want to use the same things as what everyone else uses, because the internet is one of the safest places for me. It's where my disability is disguised. I don't want to be relegated to a digital ghetto." When we design systems, we have to actively choose not to perpetuate exclusive cultures through the kind of segregation and discrimination and exclusion that happens to people in the physical world. We need to aspire to a universal experience, which includes the widest diversity possible for our community. And I'll share just one image with you that I think is really powerful. This comes from our head of illustration at Airbnb. And when she was working on redesigning the style for the illustration, she went and interviewed and talked to a lot of different people. And when she talked to employees as well as people who use the platform, what she learned was that they kept saying over and over, "It doesn't represent me." And so she designed a new illustration style that uses actual human skin tones and represents people in authentic ways that are true to their lived experiences across different disabilities, different ages, and different contexts. So design systems have the ability to give people a way to be seen and heard and depicted in authentic ways when we're inclusive about our process. Our cultures are made up of different values and symbols and rituals and heroes that represent the best in the culture. So one of my design heroes is Patti Moore. She's an industrial and graphic designer who truly embodies the meaning of inclusive design. In the mid-1970s, Patti Moore, at age 26, was working as an industrial designer at a top New York firm called Raymond Loewy, who had been responsible for designing things you might have seen, like the Coca-Cola bottle and the Shell logo. During a planning meeting, she asked the team a simple question. Couldn't we design the refrigerator door so that someone with arthritis would find it easy to open? She had her grandmother in mind. And one of her more senior colleagues replied, with disdain, "Patti, we don't design for those people." She was incensed. What did he mean, those people? So she asked the head of Raymond Loewy if she could spend some time conducting an empathy experiment and discover the realities of life as an 80-year-old woman. She had a friend who also happened to be in drag who would put on makeup for her so that she looked old and wrinkly. She wore glasses that blurred her vision, clipped on a brace and wrapped bandages around her torso so that she was hunched over and plugged up her ears so that she couldn't hear well, and put on awkward, uneven shoes so that she was forced to walk with a stick. And between the years of 79 and 82, Patti visited over 100 American cities in her new persona, attempting to negotiate the world around her and find the everyday challenges that elderly people face and how they were treated. She tried going to shopping in supermarkets, going up and down stairs, in and out of department stores, catching the bus, opening those refrigerator doors, using can openers, and many more activities. What I'm most shocked about was that during that time, she was robbed, she was beaten, and at one point she was left for dead by a gang who attacked her, and afterwards she couldn't actually have children. Since then, Patti has gone on to develop her own firm called Moore & Associates, which opened up in New York in 1980. Now Moore & Associates is based in Phoenix, Arizona, and she specializes in developing new products and services for the lifespan needs of consumers of all ages and abilities. Patti was awarded as one of 50 Americans defining the new millennium and was described as a guiding force for a more humane and livable world, blazing a path for inclusivity and a true leader in the movement for designing for everyone. So while we may not all go out and investigate the world in the way that Patti did through her empathy experiment, what I do want to just highlight is our ability to make visible the existing cultures that we have, the good ones and the not so pretty. And once we do this kind of visibility exercise, we can start to design for it and influence change over time. So let's just do a little thought exercise here. In your mind, you can answer these 4 questions. I'm not going to have you, necessarily write them down and reflect right now, but you can just write down the questions and in your own time, maybe spend some time thinking through these. So the first dimension of culture, by the way, this framework was created by Gert Hofstede back in the 70s when he studied IBM. Is values. And values are kind of that core center of culture. They're things that are recited, aren't recited, I'm sorry. They're things that are felt from the inside, because values are what come from the mind. They're basically our internal cues that drive why and how we do the things that we do. So one example of this, I have a friend who started a health startup in Silicon Valley not long ago, and instead of having the mantra of his organization be move fast and break things, his guiding value was to move slow and fix things, because he said that when it comes to healthcare, there are certain things that you just don't want to disrupt in the mind and body. Rituals are events in everyday life where culture is transformed. Sometimes they're long-lasting, and we do them every single day. They could be ad hoc gatherings that form more organically and die as fast as they came. One example of this is from Amazon, where Jeff Bezos had employees build their own full-size desks out of solid wood doors and 4x4 posts cut for each corner and attached using metal brackets. So never mind that these doors are really expensive, super heavy, difficult to move, and horrible for body health because of bad ergonomics sitting at a desk like that every day. Building a door like this at Amazon was meant to be a ritual that represented self-reliance and this reminder to be frugal when spending money on things that matter to customers. Leaders are people we admire for living the values, like Patti. They're human faces, the larger-than-life personas that you see a glimmer of in yourself and you hope to become one day. They're just essentially our behavioral role models who embody the ideals of our company or the school that we work at or the life that we aspire to live. So IBM actually helped finance a film with a different flavor of heroicism not too long ago. 20th Century Fox's Hidden Figures, which is a wonderful story, tells the story of the space race from a different perspective, uncovering the contributions of Katherine Johnson, Mary Jackson, and Dorothy Vaughan. These achievements that were accomplished by these three women aimed to essentially shine a spotlight on hidden figures from science and technology and engineering as role models for the next generation. Our last dimension of culture is symbols. These are our smallest atomic unit of culture. They're iconic and universally recognizable. And they're closely attached to our identity. They leave that first impression that's really hard to unglue once it's stuck in the mind. So for Facebook, the like button was the king of all symbols. There's been highly scrutinized redesigns of this friendly thumbs up shape that's also an action that we can do with our own hand. But you can't ignore how imposing a big white hand with a blue cuff or bangle, I'm not sure what that is, how that feels on a billboard. Is it a symbol of positivity for everyone? And what if I'm feeling a little off today? Is it supposed to make me feel better, or is it actually a little bit sarcastic? So on the surface, culture looks easy, but I think you can start to see that it's quite the opposite. Now that you've been primed, I want you to just, take away this dimension, these 4 different dimensions of culture. And, on your own time, if you answer these questions and you get your team and other teams and your boss and his boss and her boss and their boss to start actually visualizing these things and putting them up on the wall, it's a great way for you to start to understand that you all have very different visions and diverse perspectives of what these dimensions look like. And that's the first step of awareness in order to change them. So I'll leave you with that framework and let you know that for every element of culture, you can intentionally design for each one, even if the outcome is uncertain. If you do this exercise, it helps make everyone's desired future visible. If good design is about good relationships, remember one thing: the common denominator is doing good. It's not enough just to be good at design. It's more important to impact the world in a way that does good for people. Thank you.